G'day guys and girls out there in MIDI guitar land. Today I want to talk about aggregating MIDI devices, and in that I want to include the topic of Bluetooth MIDI, which has really come a long way in the past few years. If you'd asked me about Bluetooth MIDI, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I probably wouldn't have given you a very positive answer. But with the development of certain products that I'll get to as we go along, the protocol is really powerful, really reliable, really robust, and actually very, very practically useful. So let's get into it. So the lines kind of blur here in the way that I approach my MIDI setup. So I'm just going to lump in MIDI aggregation and Bluetooth all together because they're all part of the system for me. I have wired MIDI connections and I have Bluetooth MIDI connections in my setup. So why do I like Bluetooth MIDI? Well, frankly, I don't like cables, and I've been trying to strip them out of my gear where possible for years. It's probably kind of funny considering that I use 13-pin guitar systems and there's not really a very effective way to get around that 13-pin cable. But that's a cable that I'm prepared to put up with for now. When it comes to other connections, any superfluous cables, I'm just trying to strip them out of the equation. So that's point one. Number two, convenience of connection. When you're working with Bluetooth devices, you typically have the possibility to auto-connect them, connecting them to your working environment every time you want to do some music. In my case, I use multiple MIDI controllers, and to bring them all together is really important for me. And I guess probably the most important point is the possibility of aggregation of these MIDI devices. So with older Bluetooth MIDI devices, it wasn't always possible to bring together multiple peripheral devices at a central point, but particularly with the release of the CME range of products in the past, I think it's maybe 2 or 3 years, we've now got a whole bunch of devices that enable us to connect multiple peripherals to a single central device. And when we funnel all those devices to a single point, it means that we can connect directly to a device that only has, say, a single set of MIDI DIN ports in and out. Or it means if we're using maybe a USB Bluetooth connector, same thing, we can connect all those various Bluetooth devices to a single point and get into our software or into our hardware, whichever one we're using. So a brief history of the devices that I've used, and I'm guessing I first started experimenting with Bluetooth MIDI around about 2015 or 16. At the time, the reason that I wanted Bluetooth MIDI was because I was using an iPad and I had my Axe-Fx and I wanted to use an application on the iPad called FracPad so I could control the Axe-Fx remotely. So I had a floor controller which was connected via a 7-pin MIDI cable. So the Axe-Fx was sending power down the cable to the device, and that was fine. I also wanted to have access to the editing application on the iPad so that I could make quick changes if need be in a rehearsal or while performing. Probably more likely in a rehearsal than while performing, but anyway. So that kind of gave me a problem because I needed to connect this first device here. This is the Yamaha MD-BT01. You can see it up here on the screen. So the problem at that stage was that the Axe-Fx only had a single MIDI in and out DIN port, if I recall correctly. I don't think it actually had a MIDI through port like the XL Plus does. So if I had my foot controller connected directly to the Axe-Fx, then I didn't have another port to connect the iPad via Bluetooth. So I started looking at all sorts of solutions. I was looking at like merging boxes from a company called MIDI Solution. I looked at some of the iConnect audio solutions and I had varying success, but I had a lot of cables. And yeah, it just sort of didn't really pay off for me. So yes, I figured out that I could get one connected. I could get the Bluetooth connected and get the iPad going with it to control it, which was fine. But then that would always be at the expense of having access to the foot controller. So, and the other issue was that especially some of these older devices didn't exactly handle system exclusive messages very well. I still have it, but it doesn't really get used these days. The good points about the MD-BT1, it's reliable, it has a good application so you can rename it or update the firmware, although the firmware hasn't been updated in years. The slim form factor means that it fits into most devices pretty well. A con, if you'd call it a con, the longer barrels on these devices just mean that they protrude a little bit too far from the most devices for me. If it's on the floor and it's poking out cables, like little TRS cables or whatever, connecting pedals to your foot controller, it's just a little bit much. Other than that, I'd say it's pretty good. That was the first device I messed with. So as I mentioned, I had a few issues with system exclusive messages getting cut off when I was using that device. And so I looked at an alternative. That was the MI.1 from Quicko Sound. It's much smaller form factor. You can see here I had to chop half of this case off because the thickness or the width of the actual transmitters and receivers on the device, while it's pretty small, they're a little bit wider. So I couldn't, in some cases, actually get enough space to actually get the device into both ports on some of my hardware. So I had to do a little bit of surgery on that one. Pretty much similar to the MD-BT01. It doesn't have an application. This is the version 1. I don't have the version 2. It doesn't have a very functional, I don't think it even has a software application for updating the firmware or for executing various commands like turning on or off the MIDI clock capabilities or renaming the device. So also this one occasionally has some trouble pairing, particularly with the next device that I'm going to discuss. So I guess the thing that both of these devices have in common is that they basically connect to your hardware device and they transmit MIDI to a destination. Of course, the MIDI is bidirectional, but you basically would have to connect them manually. So you'd have to go, say if you were using AUM on your iPad or something, you'd have to go into the Bluetooth MIDI settings and like look for the device. And I think also this one has like a window of time that it transmits before it sort of goes to sleep. So some issues with this, but basically reliable if you do things pretty quickly. This brought me to the next device, the CME WIDI Bud. Who's this bloke here? Here we go. That's not it. Here it is. It's this guy here. So it's tiny. It's a tiny little dongle here. I had high hopes for this device, and the reason I had high hopes for it was because at the time I was using a Windows computer. And so on Windows 10 at the time, it was a real pain to try and connect anything via Bluetooth. It was barely possible, certainly not reliable. You could do it via a certain application. I think it was in the Windows 10 Bluetooth protocol, but it was just really clunky to try and get it connected. And this device promised to basically automate that. And it worked. So I guess from that perspective, it was a win. Also, it could be used with the iPad, it could be used with Mac OS, it could be used across the board. And it had an auto pairing function. So it would mean that if you connected it, say, to a foot controller and then just plugged it straight into your computer, that any time your peripheral device turned on, if this was plugged in and like waiting for something to connect to it, it would find the device. In theory, I would say that probably maybe 70 to 80% of the time it connected, the rest of the time there would be problems. And I would have to use the application, the WIDI Plus application, which I've just opened up here. I'll plug it in just to show you. So once the device is connected, you go over here and it would be searching for devices. So if I say, for example, put my iPad into advertising mode as a peripheral, it would find it here, iOS. Okay, and so I can make that default and I can connect. But the device was a little flaky. Generally good, but a little flaky. I also found that it was sometimes connected with devices automatically, even when I hadn't told it to. So this device, a little bit temperamental. It certainly worked under some conditions, but it didn't always work. Okay, so that might sound like I'm giving CME not really all that great a rap, but I am now a devout CME user. So following on from the WIDI Bud version 1 that I just mentioned, we had a string of releases from CME in the past 2 or 3 years. The very first device that I picked up was this CME WIDI Bud Pro. The reason I picked it up was because it promised to be able to connect multiple peripheral devices. So it would mean that if I paired it with a couple of these WIDI Bud Uhosts, say connected to my breath controller, to my foot controllers, they would automatically connect. Furthermore, it had the ability to connect not only CME devices, but also third-party Bluetooth devices. So my Boss V-1-WL would be able to connect to the device as well. In fact, any of the previous devices that I mentioned, the Yamaha or the Quicko, would all be able to connect to it. At least 4 devices would be able to connect simultaneously. So this was a real boon. The other great thing about this one was that I could connect it directly to the back of my iConnect audio interface, which has a USB host port on the back of the device. So I could plug this straight into that, and I could go and tell the software that I'm allocating a port to this particular device. It would give it power. Anything that then connects to it would get automatically funneled through. The other benefit of that device, that it has multiple MIDI connections on it. It has DIN ports. It supports up to 8 devices on the USB hub. So yeah, a lot of flexibility in terms of routing. I had the DIN ports of my Axe-Fx connected to the DIN ports of the iConnect Audio 4. And then I had the WIDI Bud Pro connected as well. And I could do all the internal routing. I could do port remapping. I could do signal transformation. You can do pretty much anything in the iConnectivity iConfig software. Unfortunately, that software is no longer compatible with modern macOS systems, and instead we have Oracle X, which is okay, but kind of hamstringed in a way. It limits the number of ports you can have, and it doesn't offer you the full range of control that this original software had. So when I first got into CME, when they released their second round of products, I picked up the CME MIDI host, I picked up the WIDI Bud Pro, and I picked up 2 WIDI Uhosts, and I proceeded to connect all those. But I still had some interest in like how I could potentially expand the Bluetooth connections. And that led me then to follow up and pick up this device called the WIDI Master. And the WIDI Master has become really quite indispensable for me. It's a 5-pin, as you can see here, MIDI device. It connects to, in my case, it's connected to my SY-1000, and it basically brings all my MIDI controllers together. So just by way of explanation, so just having a look at this diagram, this sort of indicates like how my MIDI signal flow works in a very general sense, at least on like the control side. So here is my SY-1000, and at this point I have the WIDI Master connected, and that acts as a central hub for all the peripheral devices. The peripheral devices are 1, the TEC breath controller, 2, the Boss Bluetooth expression pedal, and 3, the Soft Step 2 by KMI. These 2 devices, the breath controller and the Soft Step 2, are connected via WIDI Uhosts. The Boss Bluetooth expression pedal has its own built-in Bluetooth system, and it's also possible to pair it with the WIDI Master. Once they're paired, it's really simple. Just like power on the SY-1000, grab your controller. So here I've got a tiny little power bank. I've got the WIDI host. My breath controller's USB cable is plugged in to the WIDI Uhost, and when I power it on, let's see what happens. Okay, so it's connected now. And if I open up the SY1000 DAW control port, we can see the Bluetooth controller, the Bluetooth breath controller is now transmitting directly through the SY1000. Okay, give me a second while I power on the other devices. You have to believe me, these are on the floor. I'm not going to pop a camera down on them. But give it a minute, all these devices will connect and you will see a whole bunch of MIDI data. There's all being funneled through that Bluetooth device, then down a USB cable from the SY1000 and to the computer. So there we go, CC11, should have CC9, 16, back to 11. I've got 13 and 12, I should have one here. Yep, a whole bunch of other CC64, CC14, CC15, CC123, and a bunch of program changes and everything. It's just about having a bunch of control available. It's also about bringing these all to a central point. By bringing them to the central point, I can control everything in the SY1000 with these. And also, it helps me with certain software packages that give me trouble. Now, I'm not here to say anything bad about MIDI Guitar 3, but one of the issues I've had with MIDI Guitar 2 and MIDI Guitar 3, actually, let's have a look at MIDI Guitar 2. So, I'm a really big proponent of the MIDI guitar software. I use it every day. I'm big on guitar synthesis. Yeah, all about it. But one of the issues that I had with using MIDI Guitar 2 was that it would only let me bring in one controller at a time. By having all these Bluetooth MIDI devices funneled to a single point, it would now mean that I would have access to them in the software here. So while MIDI Guitar 2 is a great and groundbreaking piece of software, it has some serious limitations. The first limitation is what I was talking about, with not being able to choose multiple MIDI sources. So by aggregating all those MIDI signals at the WIDI Master, it means that at the control input point, I can choose a single device, and that way I'm going to have access to all the MIDI coming in. Just as a quick demonstration, I don't know, what if I took sustain or something, and so now my 64 will control that down there, and if I wanted to put in something else I don't know, transposer motor. Right. So I probably wouldn't use this particular device this way, but just to demonstrate the point, I've also got breath control on this pedal here. Okay, so that solves that problem. Okay, perhaps it's a small point, but I've never ever been able to allocate different input and output devices in MIDI Guitar 2. So I have to use an aggregate. That's okay, I guess. But not necessarily always ideal. So here I've got channel 1 coming in, that's the input, the regular DI input from the SY1000, and the output here is going to the iConnect. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at this and make sure this guy. And I'll just pull that out actually. Okay, interesting. So that's CC1. Okay, so it does get through to some synthesizers. I really couldn't tell you why it's not getting through to Omnisphere. Okay, so I've just opened up MIDI Guitar 3, and here I've got CC1 doing a freeze, and I've got CC2 handling the volume envelope. It's doing something, but it's not holding it indefinitely. So here we are in MIDI Guitar 3. So as you can see, this is one of those software packages which it's still in beta, so I'm not hanging garbage on it, okay? I love this software. But we've only got 3 options. We've got no MIDI controller, or we've got a single MIDI controller, one at a time. You can choose any of the ones that are connected here, or you can choose any MIDI controller, which means all MIDI, all global MIDI is arriving in the device. I don't want MIDI from everything to hit MIDI Guitar 3. So by aggregating the MIDI with the WIDI Master, the SY1000, I get access to all my MIDI control devices, and I'll be able to, you can see the action down here, CC1, CC2, I've got CC9 there, CC11, CC9, CC16, got CC64, 14 and 15, the gang's all here, CC74. Okay, so just a bit of fun there. I guess we should note that some software is designed to really handle this kind of stuff, and it won't matter. As long as you can connect all your devices via USB or manually or whatever. Software like Gig Performer, which I'm on a trial of at the moment. Yeah, Logic Pro, terrible. Really, limited routing. Bitwig Studio, always improving. Live 12, pretty good. Very flexible, however, requires a lot of channel strips to get everything to kind of go where you want it to go to. But it works. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm currently using MIDI Guitar 3 in the regular tracker mode, and I'm just using it this way because I want to point out how incredibly powerful it is, even when not using hex. I typically use the hex mode, but just today I'm just not. So while I was editing up the final version of this video, it came to my attention there's a new piece of software called NextMIDI Hub. It's a free piece of software, and basically it's a MIDI utility. On macOS, when you open it, it creates an icon up in the menu bar, and you have this port configuration section. Make sure it's turned on. Go in here, select your input devices. Got 3 selected, and it's going to aggregate all of those MIDI signals and send them to this single virtual port. Now the virtual port's called NextMIDI Merger Port. So we should have breath control. Yep, we should have foot control. We should also have this foot control. Yeah, it's all there. So this just enables you to use a software solution. Now if I want to go into, say, MIDI Guitar 3 and I want to have access to all those controllers, okay, I could choose the SY1000, but that's not going to give me the Axe-Fx controller too. So if I choose the NextMIDI Merge port, I'm now getting 1 and 11, both, one from the Axe-Fx and one from the soft step. I've still got breath control. I've essentially merged the Axe-Fx MIDI and the SY1000 MIDI at a single port. And it's free. One more thing, I think I should just add that there are certain conditions under which using Bluetooth MIDI is really fantastic, and certain conditions under which it's really not fantastic. First being, I would only ever use Bluetooth MIDI to send program change data or continuous controller data. I'm a bit on the fence with respect to the idea of using Bluetooth MIDI to transmit system exclusive messages. I actually had some pretty good success with it with the WIDI Master, but not so much with the other guys. The reason being that the longer data streams tend to get chopped off at a certain point, as I understand from what I've read. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to use Bluetooth MIDI, pretty much only use it for continuous controller data or for program change data. Don't use it for note on or off stuff. Particularly with guitar synthesis, you will just be compounding any inherent latency and making your life more difficult. Okay, I hope you found this useful. If you've got any questions about aggregating MIDI devices or Bluetooth MIDI or anything, pop them down in the comments below, and I'll always do my best to answer. I'm available for private tuition and digital rig consultation. Get in contact with me via my details, which are in my profile. Always happy to talk to other people who are interested in this kind of stuff. Okay, take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.